Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Durham District School Board of Trustees, I would like to welcome you to the Standing Committee meeting of Monday, January 3rd, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Trustee Barrett has sent regrets. I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Are there any changes to the agenda tonight? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as distributed. As we have no community or Durham District School Board presentations tonight, I'll ask Director Marsh to begin with the director's update. Nora?
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. Pleasure to be with everyone. And oh, Trustee Forbes, did you have a comment?
I just think Trustee Lundquist had her hand up.
I did. I actually wanted to ensure that we could add to the agenda a discussion of the motion for safety in schools.
A discussion for safety for schools. Do you see that as an information item or a recommended action, Trustee Lundquist?
Well, so I recognize it would still need to go to board for approval, but I would like to raise it as a recommended action this evening. I think it's a pressing matter, an urgent matter in light of what's happening in the province. And so I would like to not delay it for several weeks.
Okay, so it'll be under recommended action, Trustee Lundquist. And you would like to discuss, could you repeat?
It is my intention to bring a motion to introduce more safety measures in our schools and to do frankly a better job than the government is doing in terms of reporting of cases and such in our schools.
Okay, thank you very much. May I have a motion then to approve the amended agenda? Thank you, Trustee Templeton. Seconder, Trustee Lundquist. Now back to you, Director Marsh. Let's try that again.
Trustee Brainy has his hand up.
It's okay, Madam Chair. I wondered if you need a second for that motion that Trustee Lundquist put forward, which I would have gladly supported, but it doesn't look like we need one. So thank you.
I will be happy to come back to you when the motion, when Trustee Lundquist puts that motion forward. Trustee Brainy.
Okay, I would second that then when that does.
Thank you. And over to you, Director Marsh. Third time lucky.
Let's hope. Thank you once again, and pleasure to be here with you at the beginning of 2022. Thank you so much for all that you have been doing in terms of supporting us since we last met at the beginning of December. I want to acknowledge the strain on the community as well as the system as this pandemic continues to force us to adapt at a rapid speed and in a way that sometimes is unanticipated. Prior to the presence of this most recent variant, you know that we were allocating every resource we had to keep schools open from September to December. We were this included teachers not accessing any of their preparatory time and teaching classes during preps to cover for colleagues who needed to be away due to illness or self-isolation needs. and all available central staff being reallocated to schools to keep schools open. During the holiday season, we did notice with the Omicron variant that there was a report that it is far more contagious and spreading rapidly. Hospitals, as an example, identified that their absenteeism rate for staff increased by 4-fold. We recognized that as a system, that was going to put us in a particularly dire situation in terms of the safe operations of our schools, given the absenteeism that we were already barely managing in terms of keeping schools open, and understood that without additional measures, we would be looking at regular closures of schools due to lack of staff available for safe supervision of students. For that reason, we have continued to aggressively hire over the winter holiday break so that we have new individuals available, in some instances unqualified occasional teachers and EAs, in order to backfill when we didn't have qualified people available. We will continue to regularly and consistently hire for all positions within the district with the commitment of keeping schools as safe as possible. We also recognize that there was an announcement made last Thursday to the province, and we communicated with families and staff at that time in terms of what the province felt the plan was. We received that information Thursday night from the province and have worked since Thursday night in terms of getting ready for what we thought the plan would be this week. Understandably, things have changed over the weekend given the high hospitalization rates and the Chief Medical Officer of Health's assessment that approximately 1% of the population ends up hospitalized from from COVID, that they were going to quickly run out of hospital spaces. And so today the province did have another announcement which impacts the entire province in terms of the return to stage 2 of the reopening of the province and more limitations in terms of all community activities. And for schools, that we would be closed to in-person learning until at least January 17th, with the exception of some very few students who have such exceptional learning needs that we would have to meet those needs in person. But for all other students, we would be transitioning to virtual learning, remote learning for at least 2 weeks. We recognize that this news is a mixed response from many individuals. Throughout the pandemic, we've never been able to create ideal situation because frankly, this pandemic, there's nothing that is ideal about it. But we are committed to continuing doing our very best in terms of looking after the needs of students in their well-being, as well as addressing learning needs. Having received that information provincially this afternoon, we have met with all system leaders to review how we're going to adapt now, given the new circumstances that we became aware of. I want to add that we have not yet received any direction formally in writing from the Ministry of Education, and that sometimes there are differences between what's reported through the media in terms of media releases and press conferences, and then what we actually receive in writing. And so want to be cautious in terms of messaging this evening that is based on the verbal briefing that we received from the Deputy Minister earlier today or this afternoon, rather than written direction at this stage. So while we will be closed until at least January 17th, we will be providing emergency childcare in our school sites. Those will be primarily for healthcare workers. However, for those staff who are involved in the very limited special education offerings in our schools, we do have permission to include them in emergency childcare situations. The emergency childcare, there is a request which will have specific impact on us as a system in terms of some of our staff, because the request is that it actually extends beyond regular hours to accommodate healthcare workers who are doing shift work, as well as through the weekend. So that will be something that we will work with childcare providers in terms of doing our very best to make it available. We also have been asked to encourage all those who have not yet been vaccinated to do so. The medical community feels very strongly that vaccination is a key strategy in mitigating the impact of this variant and of COVID within the community. We have communicate or will communicate with families this evening in terms of the specific plan to the move to virtual or remote learning. We recognize that families and the system are in different places because at secondary, we have the one-to-one device deployment. And so it is an easier shift to virtual learning from secondary. We're able to keep the same schedule that they have been engaged in. And so secondary will be shifting then to virtual learning as of this Wednesday. So that message will be going out to families this evening, and tomorrow school staffs will continue to work on the shift in terms of the pedagogy and how different it looks in remote learning versus in-person learning. For elementary, it requires a change in scheduling because the requirement for virtual remote learning is 220 minutes a day. And we know based on feedback that for younger students, exceeding that time limit is overwhelming. So school administrators are reworking school schedules right now so that teachers know when they're teaching which class. And they are also going to be tomorrow determining in terms of technology deployment what the needs are within their community. Unfortunately, we do not have sufficient technology to provide a one-to-one model for families, but we are committed to trying to get at least one device for every family who may need a device for connection purposes. So school administrators will be seeking that information and school staff will be busy with deployment plans. And for that reason, Thursday will be the day that elementary virtual learning begins this week to accommodate the need of that communication with families. In terms of those rare situations where there is a need from a special education perspective for in-person learning, individualized conversations will occur to confirm attendance. We will have to do rerouting in terms of how transportation to school, and our goal is that by Monday, those classes will be in place to address those very specific situations. We are going to be asking educators to pause for a week on all assessments as students adjust to this new scenario. We're also very concerned about the impact, especially for students at secondary in terms of grading. And you may recall that previously at a time similar to this, the Ministry of Education had given approval for us to freeze all grades and that we would only provide opportunities for improvement for students. The Ministry of Education has not given the authority for us to do that this time. However, we do have the flexibility within the assessment policy guidelines that we are asking educators that after this pause of assessment of a week, that they look to see in the current context, if they're seeing a decline in the students' achievement, that they go with the most consistent grade, which is the direction within assessment policy that would have been the most consistent grade prior to this current shutdown and impact for students as they transition to virtual learning. Also recognize that there is a great impact on our staff because when schools close, our staff who are providing virtual learning and taking on the responsibilities that we have as employer of 12,000 individuals is that they too have children at home. And so we will continue to accommodate staff as best as possible in terms of the dual roles that they play, and do ask for understanding and patience. We know that sometimes students will encounter guest appearances from our staff's children during virtual learning, and we do ask and appreciate everyone's patience and understanding, recognizing that everyone is playing dual roles at this tough time within the province. I'm not sure Associate Director Wright or Superintendents Mundy or Nevels, if there's anything you wanted to add to that update that I have missed.
Not for me, Director Marks. Thanks. That was really comprehensive.
No, I didn't have anything to add either.
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any
so-
comments or questions then for Director Marsh? I'm going to call on Kayla Malcolm.
Hi, I was just wondering, for elementary schools, are they going to be running on the same time that their school usually runs from? So from maybe 9 to 3 or 8 to 2:30?
Thanks, Kayla.
So for this 2-week period, we're asking all schools, secondary schools, to stay consistent in terms of the schedule. At elementary, it will be slightly different because the regulation requires a shorter day in terms of their synchronous activities. We also acknowledge that when there's not a one-to-one device for all children within a home, we are hoping, it's never perfect, but we are hoping that some of that flex in the day will provide opportunities for different children potentially to use the same device, knowing that this isn't a perfect scenario for the next 2 weeks. Another reason why it's so important that we not emphasize evaluations during this period, knowing that the access to learning is very different when we go to virtual.
Okay, thank you.
Supplemental, Kayla?
No.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Edwards, go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, just for clarification. So you said elementary will go back to online learning by Thursday. And so staff are busy at this point in time trying to find out which families need devices, and that will be sufficient time to actually get those devices out to those families. And I know it's those that need them, so you're doing it by priority, those that need them one at a time, but that's sufficient time to get those devices out to all, basically the K-6 group of students.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Trustee Edwards, very good question. We don't have that many devices to allocate at this point. So we already have devices. Some devices did go out actually before the winter holiday in the K-6 situation. In other instances, there just aren't that many devices left. And so what we're going to have to figure out, if there are families that identify that they don't have one device and they have children, we're going to have to start asking for any family who has surplus to start returning any DDSB device so we can reallocate it. So we did meet with our system leadership today. They believe that tomorrow they'll be doing an assessment. Many of them felt they had a handle on which families would need it already. They have been working diligently, I think, in terms of communications with their families. So it does seem that they think that it would be ready to go for Thursday. If we run into, this is very fresh for us, if we run into some unexpected barriers, we would communicate differently, and we don't want to raise false hopes. So we're fairly confident that Thursday should be workable. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And it's a horrendous task. I mean, it's just huge, and I recognize that getting that input, and thank you for your response.
Thanks so much, Donna. Are there any other questions or comments for Director Marsh? And I'm seeing none. Moving on to item 8 in your agenda, under recommended actions, I'm going to call on Trustee Lundquist to put forward a motion to introduce safety measures into our schools. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I understand, I had provided this to you earlier, and I understand that you sent a copy of the motion to the secretary for the, well, maybe not the secretary for the board, the secretary to the secretary of the board, maybe. I'm not
Yes,
sure how to describe that, so I apologize. But it's a simple motion, and but I think it's an important one, and I don't think we should put it off, which is why I appreciate the willingness to amend the agenda this evening. So essentially, it comes down to this for me, and this is my rationale for it. I'm not here to debate COVID. I'm not here to debate whether immunizations work. I'm not here to debate any of it. I'm here looking at what are our obligations as a school board in terms of health and safety to the workers in the board, to keeping students safe as we can in the system, and that's all. So this motion is very specifically designed to address those two key areas, because my view is the government has not done an adequate job of that, and we are not bound by the limitations that the government has decided in its infinite wisdom to accept. So my view has always been that in order to make informed decisions, you have to be given information. And in the midst of a global pandemic, transparency and information are really, really important, because you can't make decisions without them. So the motion will read as follows. In the midst of a global pandemic, transparency and certainty are necessary to ensure students and their families and the staff that work in education can evaluate risks and understand the realities of the situations that they must face. The province's decision to cease reporting of cases and end access to testing necessarily means the members of our school communities will not have accurate information on which to base difficult decisions. The dramatic rise in the number of cases in the province also suggests that further concrete action is needed. Accordingly, my motion is, and I move that the Director of Education and/or her designates take all reasonable steps to publicly report data to the extent it is available on confirmed and presumed cases in DDSB schools, and that the DDSB ensure families and staff have a mechanism for self-reporting for those who have access to tests, and that the board provide information on school and class closures and unusual rates of absenteeism in school communities. Part 2 of the motion, because it's a 3-part motion, is that all students be required to wear masks at school, including those in kindergarten, so that masking for all students, including those in kindergarten, be made mandatory, subject only to credible human rights exceptions. And finally, that the DDSB, through its Director of Education, liaise with regional, that's unfortunate, there's a cat fight on my stairs, that the DDSB, through its Director of Education, liaises with regional public health authorities and seeks a commitment to hold accessible and equitable vaccination clinics for staff and students of the DDSB in high needs areas and/or in areas where vaccination rates remain lower than average, so as to facilitate ease of access prior to the scheduled return to school on January 17th.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. I just have a question for clarification around your motion. It seems to me that there are 3 parts to the motion, and each part will require discussion, and we probably will vote on each of those parts. I'm wondering if you would have any objection to presenting them as 3 separate motions.
No, I have no objection to it. I think arguably it's a 6-part motion, but if we take 1A, B, and C together, number 2 on its own and 3 on its own, then it's not my preference, but I offer no objection to it either.
Okay, so let's start with the first part. Then are you asking that the Director of Education send a letter to the ministry, Trustee Lundquist?
No, this is really about making sure the community, the ministry. So let me back up just for sake of clarity. So I understand from my own reading of the law that principals still have an ongoing obligation to report, regardless of what has been said in the news. So both the Ed Act and another piece of legislation that will escape me, but will come back later when I don't need it, both speak to it. Maybe Councillor Cotter can speak to it, because I anticipate that he knows which piece of legislation I'm referring to. But they both require ongoing reporting to public health or so I'm not concerned about that. What my concern is that we continue to provide that information to our communities, to our schools, to our educators, to education staff, because they deserve to be able to know what they're facing. You can't make decisions about your children and about your employment and about things that are really consequential in your lives without having access to that kind of information. And I think it's aberrant, frankly, that the province has backed away from it. And I understand that there are constraints that they're facing, but we don't have those same constraints. And so, I recognize that the information may not be as accurate as it would if we had everybody PCR testing, et cetera, but it's still better to have some information than none. And so that's the purpose of these three subsections, Chair Thatcher.
Chair Thatcher, if I could just interject.
Clarifying, I want to just get this first part now. I want to get a seconder for that. Council Cotter, so that we can have some discussion. I just want to make sure we have the right.
I just want to make sure we have the right motion. I think what Trustee Lundquist read out is different than what's on the screen, so I'm just trying to verify that we have the right document posted. If you could just give us a minute.
So I can't read
Trustee
it, but I'm happy.
Your paragraph 1A, I think, was different.
Sorry, we're going to switch it out. I think perhaps we've captured the new one. Let's just see if we're there yet.
I apologize. So I did amend my draft because I wanted to give it more clarity that I thought it lacked. And so if you don't have a version of what I read, I'm happy to provide it right away.
Okay, if you don't mind, then we'll put up what we have and then we'll make the changes here. We just want to make sure if we're providing it on screen that people are seeing an accurate version of the motion. Sorry, Chair Thatcher.
Thank you. No, we're just making sure that we've got the right information up there. So Trustee Lundquist, will you be putting that up again?
So I can't put it up. I don't have access to that, but what I can do is I can provide what I've written to Patrick Potter because I have his email handy. So I've gone ahead and done that, and he can provide it to Kathy or to Rob or whoever is popping things up on the screen.
Okay, perfect.
It won't be as neat and pretty as the version that was up there, but the language will be the same.
It'll just take a moment.
All right, I have the email now. Just give me a minute.
I would have sent it to Robert if I could remember how to spell Sarangic in my head, but I couldn't, so I had to send it to Patrick. My apologies.
I flipped that to you, Rob. You should have that now.
And Chair Thatcher, the other thing is the piece of legislation that I couldn't pull up in my mind is actually the Health Protection and Promotion Act, Section 28. So both of those have ongoing reporting requirements anyway. So okay. It seems to me this is completely in line with both of those pieces of legislation.
So Executive Lead Sir Janik is going to put up the complete information. We're going to take a look at Section 1 and Trustee Brainy, will you second that motion?
I will, Chair Thatcher. Thank you.
Thank you. And as soon as that is up on the screen for us, we'll begin discussion.
I just want to offer my apologies because I didn't intend to delay the meeting, but I do think it's important. So I'm glad that we're taking the time to put the appropriate motion up.
We will take the time to do that. So we're dealing with this item here, A, B, and C, in Section 1. And we have a This is moved and seconded. And now we're open to discussion. And I unfortunately cannot see my participation list, but I do recall that we had Trustee Crawford and Trustee Barnes with their hands up, so we'll begin there. Trustee Crawford, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a reminder, we don't really require a second when we're in committee, just in case we run into a situation where there isn't a second, but I know we always get one. What I'd like to ask the director is that some of this might be procedures that we're already doing. And so maybe we could break this down as to that. If we're already doing the procedure, could the director or one of the staff let us know that?
Chair Thatcher, are you okay if I respond?
Thank you, Director Marsh.
So right now I'm only addressing number 1 in terms of procedure. So up until the winter break, we did have a procedure in place that was school principals were responsible for reporting out not only to public health, but to the Ministry of Education, the number of confirmed COVID cases by a school. And we were providing that information for all schools on our website. The memo that we received last Thursday evening indicated that that would no longer be a requirement in terms of reporting to the Ministry of Education. Trustee Lundquist has referenced to legal acts that do talk about the importance of public interest when managing infectious diseases. And I think that if trustees wish to hear more in terms of advice from staff in relation to that, it would be Council Cotter. But currently there is not a mechanism in place to switch from what we were doing prior to December to when we reopen in 2 weeks' time.
So this would be a new process, and we're not reinventing the wheel, so to speak. I'm in favor of all of this, but I just want to be sure that we're not repeating something that we're already doing.
No, we are not. In the current landscape, we don't have a mechanism in place. It will be, and what this motion does address, because we know we won't have as many confirmed cases, given the lack of testing opportunities. So this one does actually provide some transparency and public confidence in terms of understanding what's happening in the schools, would be my initial read of it.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Okay, well, shall we call on Council Cotter for some legal information? Patrick?
Yeah, sure. I think Director Marsh covered the key point there. I think it's that, this data was data we were collecting and principals were providing to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education has now suspended that data collection, but it's certainly a process that we can continue to gather that data and publicly report on it. The challenge, of course, will be, the accuracy of the data, but I think, the motion, Part B, attempts to address that at least we have a mechanism for self-reporting in light of the fact that there may not be tests available for everyone. So I think that's sort of the general lay of the land, is that this was information that was being provided to the Ministry of Education, and now it's just a matter of what the motion calls for is for us to just post it ourselves in light of the fact that the Ministry of Education will not be doing that anymore.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So I'm sorry I'm not able to see, oh, I see Trustee Edwards' hand is up. Go ahead, Donna.
I think Trustee Barnes is up before me.
She's not on my screen. I apologize. Trustee Barnes, will you go ahead?
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I just wanted to a question to expand a little bit more on what we've talked about in regards to 1B. Do we have a mechanism for self-reporting, or is this something that will have to create? And if we have to create it, how long will it take for it to be in place?
Chair Thatcher, I can respond if you like, and I'm also providing you the list as I see the participants raise their
Thank
hands.
you.
I hope that's working.
That is very much appreciated. Go ahead, Director Marsh.
Thank you for the question, Trustee Barnes. We don't have a mechanism at this point in terms of this sort of reporting. So it is going to require some thinking in terms of how we do this. We anticipate we could potentially use a specific attendance code, and so that when families are flagging that they do have COVID, that it's a self-reported versus a confirmed case. And we would need to be very careful then when we report out publicly that we're not talking, we would clarify between confirmed cases and self-reported cases. And we would have to do it, I think, through an attendance code and then upload that data and see how we can do that. So it's going to require some back work for us for sure, but also understand why in the absence of active testing in the community, this may be of importance, as well as a sense of responsibility on the part of principals to be communicating from a health and safety perspective.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Patrice, supplemental.
Thank you, Director Marsh. So I'm glad that we are kind of have an idea how that will work. Timelines, do you think that you have a timeline as to how long it would take to get that up? Would we be up by the 17th, or would that be something that we'll be looking at probably later?
Trustee Barnes, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know. We just found out, we've just been working through a number of scenarios, obviously, since last Thursday. So our first priority is going to be deployment of technology and getting virtual underway, remote learning for those in-person learners. And then from there, we'll start to frame what coming back looks like and whether or not we can have this ready. What I can commit to is that we'll provide a response by board in terms of if it's ready or not. And by then, if it's not ready, we could identify when it would be. We're anticipating that it could be, but I just, as you know, when you're dealing with technology and uploads of data and then converting that data into useful information for public consumption, it can sometimes be a little bit more complex than we anticipate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director. Trustee Edwards, go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes somewhat asked the question. Is my concern is I understand that, you know, the transparency and yes, for families to be able to have something to do their own evaluation on what the risks are of sending their child to school fully. But I also understand that our staff are fairly busy, as Director Marsh said, about, you know, first priorities getting technology out there. So my concern is that how fast do we put this out there and then find out then that eventually the ministry is going to reverse its decision. The other thing is that ensuring that no matter what, we have a very large disclaimer on the data, because we know that the testing isn't going to be happening in the community. It's basically self-identified whether they have COVID or not. So, I just really, to balance that as well as cost, if there's going to be cost for us to do this and so forth. So I'm just concerned about, yes, I really fully support the transparency and trying to get that information out, because I know as a parent, I would want that information, but I'm really concerned as far as priority and supporting the online learning first.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I'm going to call on Chair Morton. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Kayla had her hand up before I did. Thank you.
Well, we didn't have it in that order.
Sorry, I'm doing my best.
Thank you.
And I think I may have reversed Nikki and Darlene later on, just so.
Oh, okay. Carolyn, would you mind going ahead and just in keeping with my list here, I would very much appreciate it. I'll definitely come to Kayla next.
Sorry, Kayla. I'm just wondering, when we're talking about reporting, what is the role of Durham Health?
So maybe I can jump in, Chair Thatcher, if that's okay.
Thank you.
There are as Trustee Lundquist referenced, there are existing statutory obligations on principals to report cases or suspected cases of COVID-19 to local public health, and that is Section 28 of the the Health Promotion and Protection Act and Section 265(1)K of the Education Act. So that's a little bit tricky because the statements from the ministry around reporting are not clear whether they're talking about the public health piece or the piece that we've been doing also, which is reporting to the Ministry of Education for the purposes of public disclosure. So this motion deals only with the ministry, what was replacing really what the process for reporting to the Ministry of Education on the numbers. The obligations to health remain, to just report to health remain, subject to further direction we may receive from the Ministry of Health on that. They have indicated that we're not required to do it. So we're in a little bit of a limbo there in terms of how that's going to unfold, and we're hoping that we'll get some clarity on that over the next 2 weeks. But that will be a separate issue, and we'll obviously will comply with our statutory obligations and directions from the ministry in that regard.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Could I have a supplemental?
Go ahead.
I'm just curious to know, do we have an accurate handle on the results of the rapid antigen tests?
Superintendent Mundy, did you wish to respond? Thank you.
Yes, I can
Is that
respond
okay with you,
to that.
Director?
Thanks. So currently, with our staff who are unvaccinated, they were required in the fall to complete 2 rapid tests a week. And then beginning in late November, December, it was 3 rapid tests per week. As I think I mentioned when we met in cameras, we didn't see a large volume of positive cases through that process, but it's important to note that we haven't been collecting that data since school closed in December, and the Omicron rise in numbers has really happened since the school closure in December for the break. So I'm not sure that the data we have is very accurate and in supporting the discussions. I do know that medical fields and they are tracking that data in terms of hospitalization and noting a decrease certainly for those who are vaccinated in terms of being admitted to hospital.
Thank you, Superintendent Mundy. Now go to Kayla Malcolm. Go ahead, Kayla.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm something that Director Nora Marsh said earlier. So will we continue to send out emails to families when a school has a confirmed case? Because I know Robert said that we will be collecting the data, but will we also be releasing it back to families?
Director Marsh?
So the Ministry of Education has said there's a shift in public health policy, I think, around having an understanding of how many people in the community have COVID-19, because there's so many people, there's a feeling that they can't provide testing for all people. And so they're switching their data point and monitoring to be more about hospitalizations in terms of understanding how we're doing related to the pandemic, is my layperson's understanding of it. So what we're anticipating as a result is that we're not going to have the same access to information that we had prior to the winter break, which would have been positive COVID tests done and confirmed through public health. Public health will not be performing that service for us, is our understanding. However, we do, if there is an instance where they happen to do that, we would report that out as we did previously. But our understanding is that we really won't be getting very much information from public health related to positive COVID cases. So that's what we've heard to date, understanding that things may continue to change. What we would do, I think the spirit of this motion is that there would still be communication out to families around suspected cases.
Thank you, Director.
Point of order, Chair. Could we just, and I don't want to stifle discussion, but we do have a motion on the floor, and I would just appreciate if we could keep our questions and discussion to the motion at hand, and any other supplemental questions be left to once the motion is dealt with. That would be helpful.
I agree. Thank you. I believe that Trustee Forbes, that you're next up on the speakers list.
Perfect, thank you. So I am supportive of the motion, and I do understand that, you know, the government may or may not, I mean, they are entitled to change their directives to us, but in absence of that, I think it is important that we inform our families and staff with the data that we have. And I don't think a potential change to something that they may or may not do should prevent us from implementing or considering this motion. And if it isn't, if it's kind of just dusting off a process that we were doing in terms of collecting data and not reinventing anything, I think that's helpful. And then just you know, obviously focusing on the return to school is important. So I don't think that any potential changes, I don't know if we would need to amend the motion to indicate, unless further mandated or by the ministry to do something else, or and if that's just implied in the motion. Or not implied by the motion, but implied by the directive, unless superseded by any further directions from the ministry. I'll ask Trustee Lundquist, since it's her motion, do we need to include any language like that?
So it's not my motion anymore because it's on the floor, but I would say I don't.
Excuse me, Trustee Forbes, could you please direct your question through the chair? And we'll have that. I'd like to go ahead and just take the question from Trustee Lundquist and Crawford, and then we'll put that motion back up on the screen. If there's something you'd like to change, an amendment there, then certainly that would be the time to do it. So I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist. Go ahead, Nikki.
So it may make most sense for me to speak last, Chair Thatcher, because you know, it's not really my job to defend a motion, but a couple of things have been said that I think are really important.
I'll go ahead to Trustee Crawford then and come back to you. Okay, Trustee Crawford, go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment or a suggestion procedurally, in that no matter what we do here, this is going to have to go to board. But I'm also thinking there are times when committees or boards make suggestions that the director or staff can say, yes, we can do that. In other words, are there some of these items that the director could take the suggestion and start the letter to the government earlier?
Trustee Crawford, I believe that Trustee Lundquist did mention that at the beginning of the motion, that it will have to go to board. We understand that. What was your other question?
My point wasn't, I know that it has to go to board, but that's a 2-week difference from today. And sometimes we make suggestions to staff and they say, yes, we can do that. So yes. I'm saying that some of these suggestions could get away earlier and be done by staff.
Yes.
Rather than waiting the 2 weeks. And I would like a comment from the director on that.
Director Marsh, did you wish to comment on that? I believe that you're saying, and Councillor Cotter also said, that this is a possibility for sure and within our right to do.
I think that the school closure of 2 weeks does provide us a bit of room here to figure out exactly how we meet the spirit of this motion. I think despite it not being passed officially until board, should it pass committee, we would then start to not implement, but prepare for implementation by determining how, for example, we could automate the uploading of absenteeism codes that reflect perhaps suspected cases of COVID versus confirmed cases and that sort of thing. So if it passes committee, I think we would start to look at how we address it from an automated point of view and be able to report back by board.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back. Trustee Lundquist, can I move on to Trustee Templeton and then come back? Okay, go ahead, Scott. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I don't really have a question. It's more a comment that if we move forward with this, there's something happening here that obviously hasn't happened at higher levels. We're actually being proactive. And I like the idea, so I will support this.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Lundquist, over to you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add a couple of points because things had been raised that I think are important to address. So I understand that the priority right now is the deployment of devices so learning can start happening. Like, I completely understand that, and this motion is not meant to detract from that in any way. What the motion is designed to do, though, is to ensure that when those children and those educators are back in classrooms, they can be back safely with information and knowledge, and with some other health and safety provisions in place. So I don't think it detracts from priorities. I actually think it speaks to our priorities of reopening schools and getting kids and educators back in classrooms. The reality is we've been collecting information already, so I don't see that as a big issue in terms of extra costs. It really is just a matter of continuing to do a piece of it that would have gone to government but is now going to go directly to the system instead. I recognize that still takes some human power, but I think that is a small price to pay for vital information that is necessary to make good decisions about your family's health and safety. So I don't see that as a significant deterrent. And then finally, the issue of amendment, if the government changes course, really, well, of course, if we have to do it a different way, then we have to do a different way. I understand that. And so, I don't have an objection to an amendment that indicates something to the effect of if this information is required to be reported vis-a-vis a different process, that we move to that process. No objection whatsoever. But practically speaking, I think that this is really carefully tailored to say, in the absence of information that people need, we're going to do the best we can to provide the best information we can. And I agree with Donna, and I'm confident that we have smart legal expertise that is going to appropriately put caveats on the information so that there's no dispute about the content or the quality of that information. And I think that that's easy enough to do, but I certainly don't see that as any impediment to doing something that is what I think is right for the kids and the educators and the education staff in the system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Lundquist, it appears then that Executive Lead Sir Janik has put this back up on the screen, and I can go back to Trustee Forbes. Darlene, is there, as you see this up here on the screen, is there an amendment that you wish to make to the motion?
Mute, yes. Yeah, if we could maybe just end, if it makes sense to sorry. Yeah, it provided that it is not inconsistent with any provincial directions. And then I guess we would, if that makes sense.
Okay. Should the government alter its direction on collection of this data, the board will revisit.
That's
this?
I think that's a great amendment. Yeah, I would support that amendment.
So this is, we'll just add this to the number 1 section here. Should the government alter its direction on the collection of this data, the board will review its position.
Thank you. I would move that amendment or support it, since it came first from Trustee Lundquist. Okay. Articulated what I was trying to say.
I'd like to ask Executive Lead Sir Janik. I'm wondering if it's possible to get our stadium view so that we can vote on the amendment.
Thanks, Chair Thatcher. We were planning on moving to that. So if I think you're ready to call the vote, we're happy to go to that now.
I am ready to call the vote. So we're going to be voting on the amendment. And we're going to go to our stadium view, and we're going to ask all those in favor of the amendment to put up the green check mark. Just give us a minute for us to get the stadium view up on the screen. Looking promising so far, though.
It'll just be another moment. The first time takes a bit of time. There we go.
There we go. All those in favor of the amendment, please put a green check mark up beside your picture and the stadium view. And all of those opposed, could you please put a red X up there? We have 1, 2, 3. We have 9 in favor and 1 opposed. So the motion is amended. So we have it is moved and seconded, and I'd like to vote on the motion, and I won't reread all of that, but I'm asking now if we could vote on the amended motion. And all of those in favor, put a green check mark up beside your picture on the stadium view. And all of those opposed? Paul, could you either use the green check mark or the red X, please? I have 9 in favor and none opposed. The motion passes. I'd like to move on now to the second motion. And I'm wondering, Executive Lead Sir Janik, if we could now go back to the motion. Ah, here it is. So the second motion, wonder if you could put that up again, Rob, please.
Chair Thatcher, I'm not too sure we'll be able to do that at the same time as stadium seating.
Okay.
But happy to read it out, that the second part of that motion there is that masking for all students, including those in kindergarten, be made mandatory, and brackets subject to credible human rights exceptions only.
Excellent. Could I have a seconder to that motion? Trustee Templeton. And now it is moved and seconded of what was read by Executive Lead Sir Janik. If we could have some discussion, is any discussion to follow?
Can you see hands, Christine?
I can see hands. It looks to me like we have Trustee Edwards and then Trustee Stone. Go ahead, Donna.
Just a question, because each time we've talked about the masks, we've asked whether the Chief Medical Officer has made any statements around masking for kindergarten students. And wondering if, I mean, I haven't seen anything, but wondering if staff or have heard anything from our Chief Medical Officer.
I actually think Director Marsh can answer that question.
Thank you, through you, Chair. We did revisit the question around masking, both with the province through the Deputy Minister as well as Durham Region Health Department. They are not changing any of their directions or recommendations. So it is status quo from their perspective in terms of the masking being mandatory for grades 1 to 12.
Thank you. And Trustee Stone, go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So I would need more data on this. There have been reports out about cloth masks not doing anything. The surgical masks being second in line. The N95s we know are the best, especially for Omicron. And there have been deleterious, detrimental effects on speech and language for children with masks on. So especially for kindergarten kids, I would need more data on this before I voted for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Crawford, did you have a question?
Well, just on the portion that says subject to credible human rights exceptions only, is that the correct wording that should be in there? Is everybody satisfied with that wording, or should there be some changes there? It seems to me I've seen it different before. Subject to credible human rights exceptions only. Is that standard?
My best guess would be that it would be accurate, but perhaps Council Cotter might comment on that.
That would be good.
Sure, through you, Chair Thatcher. I think the language is consistent with what we've seen used before. I think it captures the spirit of the necessary exemption to allow for human rights accommodations. So I think it's.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'll speak to this, and I'm supporting this, even though it could be that the law might be different. I think what we're doing here is we're expressing what the board feels should be mandatory. And we should do that and not argue about whether or not they're going to accept it or not, because it's an expression of what we think should be done.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Chair Morton. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. I'm curious to know, I know that a lot of our kindergarten students are presently masking. Do we have any idea as to percentages? Is it the majority of our kindergarten children who are masked?
I'm not sure who could answer that question. Director Marsh, thank you.
Thank you. So we have had a very ambitious encouragement program, which was the ministry direction to us. So we have seen high subscription in terms of kindergarten students masking, but it is not at 100%. It is, you know, we have had really great response in terms of students understanding the importance of masking, where we do see 100% in other areas. We also see the need for redirection with older students as well, right? But we have not collected statistical data in terms of the number. We couldn't give you an exact number. Anecdotally, it would tell you that most classrooms we see the vast majority of kinders masked, but not necessarily all. And sometimes it depends based on school.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Kayla. Kayla, do you have a question?
Not a question, it's more just kind of a statement. Is that okay?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, well, through you, just considering the fact that most kindergarten students, and even when they're starting at age 4, sometimes age 3, they cannot get vaccinated and they're not vaccinated. So having this where they have to wear masks in school kind of adds to their safety. And speaking on safety in schools, I believe that might be one of the best things that we could do for them. They can get breaks, just like secondary students get breaks. But I do believe that this might be the best thing for kindergarten students while in school.
Thank you, Kayla. And I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist. Go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I liked the description of ambitious encouragement because I think it's reflective of what has happened and that is manifesting in some classrooms. But in light of the new variant, and the rapid spread of it, and I'm not arguing about seriousness of it, but the rapid spread of it and what that impact is on classrooms, to me, we need to move past ambitious encouragement and into something that is mandatory. And that is the position of the motion. That was my position when writing the motion. And I hope that trustees understand that. When we spoke to Dr. Kyle last summer, he was very clear that his views and such would change, and though they haven't on this particular issue, that doesn't mean our views cannot change in light of the information we have that has been made available to us. And the information I have available to me says that this is actually a key health and safety component for both the young ones in the classrooms, but also for the staff who are required to be very near them while they teach.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford, is your hand up? Do you have a question, or is your hand still up from the last one?
It was just a quick question on is kindergarten descriptive of everything? I noticed that it was just mentioned that there's more than one kindergarten. Is it necessary to indicate that? I mean, it's for all students.
Yes. I'm not sure. I don't feel that there would be a need for another description. Do we want to change it to FDK, full day kindergarten, or is it? I'm not sure what it. Rob, yeah. Would you mind reading that portion for us again?
Well, how it's read in the second part of this motion here is that masking for all students, including those in kindergarten, be made mandatory subject to credible human rights exceptions.
I guess it's a simple question, but it's kindergarten. Is there more than one kindergarten?
I think it's correct as written. I'm going to go to Trustee Templeton. I'd like to call the vote on this as soon if I can. I just want to be sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Trustee Templeton.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I just wanted to say that I have seen it because I picked my granddaughter up at school. She's in kindergarten, and every student that comes out, believe it or not, most of them are social distance, and most of them have a mask on. My 2-year-old grandson puts a mask on when he goes into a store. So I don't think the issue is whether they can wear it or not. I think some of them think it's kind of cool, but I would be in support of this. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Nikki, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I apologize because I don't intend to complicate my own motion, but it seems to me that I probably should have said in-person learning, because there will be, of course, kindies and others who are learning at home, and there's no requirement for them to wear masks as students in the DDSB at home.
Okay.
So I recognize that sounds sort of self-explanatory, but it doesn't specify, and I just don't want there to be confusion. So maybe that should be added in some way.
Let's be specific and add that, amend the motion to read in-person learning.
Chair Thatcher, I hate to interject, but Trustee Crawford did ask a question about the definition of kindergarten, and Section 34 of the Education Act does make a distinction, I think, between kindergarten and junior kindergarten.
Okay.
So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the board in response to Trustee Crawford's question.
So are you suggesting that we say full day kindergarten or junior and senior kindergarten?
I would say kindergarten and junior kindergarten if you wanted to capture all pupils.
Okay. So we have an amended agenda. Rob, I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading that to us again with that addition. And I'll call.
For clarification, is it supposed to say junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten, or just kindergarten and junior kindergarten?
Kindergarten and junior kindergarten would be,
okay.
would be consistent with the Ed Act.
I've pasted that into the chat as well, but I'll read that out for the benefit of those at home. That masking for all students, including those in kindergarten and junior kindergarten, be made mandatory during in-person learning, and then in brackets, subject to credible human rights exceptions only.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that, Trustee Crawford. So I'd like to ask you if you could go into your reactions, please. We're going to vote on the amendment. If you're in favor of the amendment to the motion, green check mark. And if you're opposed, red X. We have 9 in favor and none opposed. So I'd like to vote now on the amended motion. If you're in favor of the amended motion, green check mark. If you're not, red X. So I have a 6 in favor and 2 opposed. Motion passes. Moving on to the third motion. Rob, if you wouldn't mind reading that to us.
Thanks, happy to, Chair Thatcher. That the DDSB, through its Director of Education, liaises with regional public health authorities and seeks a commitment to hold accessible and equitable vaccination clinics for staff and students of the DDSB in high needs areas, and/or in areas where vaccination rates remain lower than average, so as to facilitate ease of access prior for the scheduled return to school on January 17th. And that's also been pasted in the chat just for the benefit of trustees to read that, review the wording of it.
Thank you. I'm looking for a seconder for the motion. And Trustee Forbes, is there any discussion? Trustee Stone, go ahead, Linda.
Thank you through you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to know where the whole health department falls on this. Do they not, Darlene, I think you might remember we had a discussion about this when we were in South Oshawa, some of the South Oshawa schools, to see if we could call the city or the health department to see whether or not we could have a van or something come around to some of the schools and offer them. But I think one of the discussions was about resistance to the vaccinations. So that could be a problem, but I'm not opposed to us looking into this for sure.
So I'm going to go to Director Marsh. Go ahead, Nora.
Thanks. Just to build on Trustee Stone's comments, I was reading this carefully just to make sure that it was something that I could indeed deliver on in terms of your question, Trustee Stone. So the way that I'm interpreting this is that it's not about the outcome, it's about the process. And this motion, if passed, I would then advocate on behalf of the Durham District School Board with Dr. Kyle in terms of Durham Region Health taking on these actions. It's not to say that we would be taking on these actions, but we would do the advocacy work on behalf of the board. So if I'm understanding the intent correctly, I think that is something that we could deliver on and report back to you by board in terms of response from Durham Region Health Department.
Thank you. Supplemental, Trustee Stone? No. Trustee Forbes, go ahead, Darlene.
Yeah, so I think it's a really important motion, given the, Trustee Stone and I did tour many schools, including those in, in the south of Oshawa. And it just sometimes traveling large distances for families is not feasible. So I think this is a really important equity issue. And so I just have, I guess, a point of, so if this is something that can be taken by staff, I guess we would still vote on the motion and it would come to board, or how does that work? Sorry, it's a point of clarification.
I'm thinking, Trustee Lundquist, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that the motion, that as Nora mentioned, that she would send a letter to Dr. Kyle, Durham Region Health, and report back to us at board with the response. Nora?
Yeah, this one is a wee bit awkward because we're not in an official board meeting, because I would actually be externally actioning something that hasn't been passed to board. I'm wondering, yes, depending on what it does in committee, whether or not you should actually, for just process purposes, go into a special board meeting immediately following committee to pass it. And then that way me actioning it is clean for you, if that's okay, and for me.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. And Trustee Crawford?
Well, just a point of order on that. We can't go into a special board meeting because all of the trustees are not here, so they can't be notified. But I'm just wondering, is this a problem? Because some of these things I'm surprised that we're not already doing. And is the reason we're not doing them is because it doesn't conform with what the government directions are? That's a direct question for the director.
So we have not, we have volunteered and worked with Durham Region Health Department in terms of offering up our sites to encourage vaccinations and for vaccinations to be held regionally where it makes the most sense. I think that the board passing this in a public domain and directing me to advocate in a slightly different way sends a bit of a different message to Durham Region Health Department. And the one thing that I am reading here is that there's an anticipated or a desire that there would be an outcome by January 17th. So Council Cotter, perhaps you could advise us in terms of getting this motion passed by board, what the process would be then in terms of a special board meeting so that we could potentially action this before the 17th. If it's passed at committee.
We're suggesting a special board meeting tonight.
I was suggesting a special board meeting immediately following this board meeting. And so I'd like Council Cotter to advise on how that would be held.
Well, I would just like to mention that we still need to go back and complete our agenda from the in-camera session. So, so I'm just going to, I'll just add that, and perhaps Council Cotter might weigh in on that.
Sorry, a special board could be called at the discretion of the chair or a majority of the members. You know, so it could be done, but Trustee Crawford does raise a process question about members not being present and not being able to participate, which I think, even though technically it could be done, I think that's a valid process concern. So my suggestion would be it could still be done in advance of the 17th if that timeline was you know, wanted to be met, but with some notice. The bylaws do typically call for at least 24 hours notice, which can be waived if the matter is urgent. I don't see that type of urgency to waive at least the 24-hour notice period. So I would suggest to be on notice of at least 24 hours.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So at the very beginning, I did indicate that I thought a special board meeting was going to be necessary. And I would strongly suggest that that what Patrick Cotter has described and what Paul Crawford has suggested makes a ton of sense. So I would be asking the board chair to convene an emergency meeting, you know, with 24 hours notice, so that we can actually begin addressing these matters in a serious way.
Yes, and Chair Morton has accepted that. Thank you. So I'd like to call the vote now and ask everyone to go into your reactions. I'm wondering, Executive Lead Janik, if you wouldn't mind reading that third motion. If you're in favor of the motion, we're looking for a green X, and if you're opposed, a green check mark, and if you're opposed, a red X.
Happy to, Chair Thatcher, that the DDSB, through its Director of Education, liaises with regional public health authorities and seeks a commitment to hold accessible and equitable vaccination clinics for staff and students of the DDSB in high needs areas and/or in areas where vaccination rates remain lower than average, so as to facilitate ease of access prior to the scheduled return to school on January 17th.
Okay, thank you. So we have the 10 in favor and none opposed. So the motion passes. Thank you. Trustee Crawford, did you have a question?
Just, it's not a point of order, but it really means that all of these items, there's three different items here actually, will go to the special board so that all of them can be passed. I know we're discussing only item 3, but all of these can go to the special board to be passed, correct?
Correct. Thank you. All right, so we'll move on in our agenda. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 9 on your agenda, information items. and we'll begin with the student trustee report. Who will begin this evening?
I will begin.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, we would like to provide our monthly student trustee report. At our previous Student Senate meeting on December 13th, 2021, we had the privilege of having Devika Mather as a panelist for our group discussion regarding the new human rights policy. Together, we discussed the importance of this policy, as well as how student voice and values can be represented and incorporated into it. The Northern Regional Breakout is approaching the final stages of the North Durham introductory video. Upon completion, senators will bring the video back to their respective schools and request for the video to be played in homeroom classrooms. This initiative will hopefully serve as one of many opportunities to promote and work towards our goal in uniting and connecting the 3 Northern secondary schools and their students.
The West Region Senators were able to discuss the Community Hours resources and places document, and we were able to have a brief conversation about each. Later, I introduced a new initiative for our region in hopes that the planning phases will soon be complete and ready for us to engage with further.
The East Region Senators received another opportunity to converse about the highs and lows of their respective schools. Majority of the schools in the East hosted holiday-themed events and activities such as Warm and Cozy Day and Festive Color Day in order to get into the holiday spirit.
During the Student Voice Working Group, I spoke to the senators about having specific student representatives at their schools attached to their student activity councils, student governments, or student bodies, such as grade level or homeroom representatives. I explained to them the difference between their role as a senator and what the role would be as a homeroom or grade level rep. We were also able to have a discussion about the importance of these representatives at each of our schools. I believe having these roles in our schools will help with student voices and widen the communication between our students. Leaving this breakout session, senators were told to come back with 1 to 2 initiative ideas that they collected from students that could later be run by our working group at their schools.
The Equity Working Group began to construct plans and initiatives that will occur during the course of the remainder of the school year. Some ideas that were brainstormed that could occur during the school year include the creation of social media posts that spread awareness about cultural holidays and creating resources that provide information about the use and importance of gender pronouns.
As previously mentioned in past standing committee meetings, the Student Success Working Group is continuing to work on our project, The Ins and Outs of Finding Help resource. Senators are working diligently to answer the 5 W's of finding help to provide a clearer picture for DDSB students on what finding help truly means and truly looks like. We anticipate that this resource will take many months to complete, but are remaining optimistic and intend on having a rough draft completed prior to May to tie in with Mental Health Awareness Month. We will continue to update the school board on the progress of this project.
This concludes our report. We would be happy to take any questions, and we're looking forward to working alongside the board for the remainder of the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for our student trustees?
Sorry, through you, Chair, if I may add a quick comment if we have time.
Go ahead, James. We do have time.
Thank you. So you may, or as in all of you, the board may have noticed that we didn't talk about the recent transition for remote learning or that new announcement. And there's 2 reasons for that, primarily because when we create our reports, we have to have them a week in advance. We didn't know the details of when we were transitioning to remote learning, or if we were. And the second part being because with remote learning, there are many questions and opinions up in the air, whereas many students are in favor of it, many students are against it. We felt that we weren't able to properly represent the student voice and put it into this report. However, at our board meeting coming up, we would like to report on this, and which will hopefully be after virtual learning. And I did want to make a comment quickly and also thank Director Nora Marsh for talking about the pause on new evaluations. I know that many students have commented in the past and last year about the struggles of online learning. Not to say that everyone struggles with it, many people do well, but however, many students do struggle with it. And I think that having that pause will support our students. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, James. Did you want to add to that, Kayla?
Yes, just to add on to what James is saying, we are speaking to students as of when the announcement was made and just answering their questions, talking to them just about what is happening and how we're trying to deal with it. So we are still talking to students about the adjustment and the changes that are going on.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions or comments, so I'll thank you, James, DeMario, and Kayla. And moving on in the agenda to 9B, and I'll call on Superintendent Monday to talk about the AODA compliance update and Lead Canada process.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. The Durham District School Board submitted its annual AODA compliance report in June 2021. In August, the DDSB was selected by the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility for an AODA desk audit. Working with the senior compliance analyst from the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility, DDSB staff reviewed the AODA compliance and updated the DDSB Employee Emergency Response Plan. The desk audit was completed in November, and the emergency response plan will be implemented once schools reopen. Our current accessibility working group has representation from the Ability Center, and they had identified an opportunity for DDSB to participate in the Lead Canada process, which focuses on advancing inclusion and accessibility and will support DDSB in assessing and analyzing our internal practices, processes, and strategies. The goal will be to identify areas of improvement with a focus on further development of accessibility and inclusive initiatives, and this will help form the new multi-year accessibility plan. It's very exciting for us to partner with this local organization, and we will be the first public school board, actually the first school board, to participate in the process. A number of other public towns and groups have participated, but we are the first board. This evening, I have Lisa Coppin, Senior Manager and Co-Chair of the Accessibility Working Group, here with me, and both of us would be happy to answer any questions or accept any comments.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. And it does sound like a really exciting process. And the fact that we are the first school board to go through this is really, really great. You do mention in your communications plan as far as that a report will be shared to board. You have, is it going to be along with the changes to the multi-year accessible plan in the spring? So I'm thinking more like May, if not June. Is that when you're looking at doing that?
I might let Lisa Coppins mention in terms of, she's been more active in leading alongside the lead committee.
Everyone, through you, Chair Thatcher. The actual report we're anticipating in probably late January or February to come to us through the working group, and it will actually be what helps form our multi-year plan. So we will certainly, in terms of communication, have the report from the Lead Canada program in advance of finalizing the multi-year plan.
And just a supplemental, I think I read it, but I can't seem to find it, was just how many people are involved in it as far as the that actually take the lead, and then I understand you'll have working groups and stuff. So just question that.
And through you, Chair. We had about 25 individuals participate in the two-day workshop assessment that took place in December, and a representation across the board. And our working group, there are approximately 10 of us that are on the working group that will then take that information that comes from all the work the participants did and help develop that multi-year plan. So we had a really good cross-section across the organization, management, senior management level, as well as some coaches and facilitators who could speak to the work that's being done in the school. So excellent representation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing no further questions or comments. So I'll move on to item C on the agenda, and we'll go to Chair Morton for information around the trustee attendance records.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. The attendance records can be found on pages 16 and 17, but I do have to make a comment. Looking at the kind of year that we've had, our attendance has been excellent. So I just think everyone would deserve an A+ for attendance during this year. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're looking for a verbal report from Associate Director Wright around the free menstrual products themselves. Associate Director Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. An announcement was made in October 2021 that through a 3-year partnership with Shoppers Drug Mart, a supply of menstrual products would be made available free of charge to school boards. The announced quantities school boards were to receive were based on students aged 13 to 18, and in our case, totaled just under 1,200 cases of product per year over the 3-year agreement. The announcement also included a distribution of 26 product dispensers for our board. We have recently received the transfer payment agreement, recently as in just before the winter break. And because of the a late arrival of the transfer payment agreement, we have yet to receive either the announced products or the dispensers. In advance of the announcement, however, DDSB trustees had already passed a motion to roll out free menstrual products to students, the rollout of which was to take place over the coming 2 school years as budget allowed. Since trustees passed that motion, all menstrual product dispensers that existed in schools have been changed from coin-operated machines to dispense freely. Those dispensers cover all female secondary school washrooms and some female elementary school washrooms. Additional dispensers are currently in the process of being purchased to support further installation at additional secondary and elementary school washrooms. I believe the genesis of the report was actually a question about the cost to subsidize the program. As was reported last year when this subject was discussed, the data we have on the usage of menstrual products in schools continues to be insufficient to estimate the eventual cost. I will say, however, we have seen no appreciable increase in the use of products or the supply of products, and therefore the cost since the move to make all the dispensers free of charge. That being said, of course, the product sponsorship should help defray operating costs as long as the sponsorship is in place. The cost of purchase and installation of dispensers is expected to be able to be handled within the custodial budget this year. That's my report, Madam Chair. Happy to answer any questions through you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Associate Director Wright? Trustee Stone.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So just wondered what, I know you had a cost on to change the dispensers. What do you remember what that cost is?
I don't, Trustee Stone. It was internal labor that was used. So when we had our maintenance department over the period of the shutdown last year, attend the schools and swap out the mechanisms. So I don't have a cost. There was very little in terms of labor because it was our staff. And I don't recall the cost for changing out the mechanism, but I don't believe that it was very expensive. So the bulk of the cost will be purchasing new dispensers to install in schools as we move forward. Likely about $500,000 to purchase and install those dispensers.
Okay, I think that's up from, I think it was less than that before. I think it was maybe 250, 300,000 that we're talking about. So you're thinking 500,000 for new.
That is the updated estimate based on cost, yes.
Okay, that's quite a bit. And so at this point, we have no idea whether or not the problem was cost of the product or the product itself.
We don't have any data to support either that. I'm not sure saying it was a problem was an issue. I do believe products were available in all schools outside of what was included in the dispensers. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure we have data to answer that question anyway. I apologize.
So, sorry, will we have data on that? Because this is it's $500,000, a lot of money to bring in these. I know we voted on it and everything, but to bring in the dispensers, still not knowing quite what the problem is. So we're doing things that we don't even know why we're fixing it, because we don't know if it's the cost or the product. So until we find that out, I mean, obviously there's not going to be a cost, but if it's the product, then we have to change the product. Otherwise there's no uptake.
Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at. We have not received any of the sponsored product from Shoppers Drug Mart yet, so we haven't rolled out any different type of menstrual product than we currently had in stock. I don't believe we've ordered any significant quantities since then. I think the intention is just to provide products free of charge to students wherever they choose to access them, for all the reasons that were brought forward from our student presenters.
And sorry, just one more question. Do we know if the product is pads or pads and tampons, or just tampons? Do you know what the product is?
My understanding is that the Shoppers Drug Mart sponsorship is providing us with pads and dispensers for pads.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? And I'm seeing none. So I'm moving on to item E on the agenda, and I'll call on Trustee Barnes for the OPSPA report.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. There's no report at this time.
Thank you. So Trustee Barnes, call on you then for item 10 for the Equity and Diversity Ad Hoc Committee report.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. The report can be found on pages 18 to 19 in our package. Available for any questions or comments.
And I'm seeing none. Thank you very much, Trustee Barnes. We do have a couple of correspondence items there in the agenda. I have to admit to you to making a mistake. I did adjourn the in-camera meeting, and so I'm wondering if there would be any objection at all to forgiving Christine for making a mistake and heading back to the in-camera meeting. I think it'll just be for a very short time. Any objection at all? All right, so as there is no further business here, I will adjourn this meeting tonight and ask you if you just hang around for a couple of minutes so that we can return to the in-camera session.